Hello again. 3 chapters today. Feeling a little feisty. Doing a little extra. So, not that it matters because you can watch them all the same day or one every day the rest of your life. But anyway. Wayside School Gets a Little Stranger by Sachar. Chapter 22, Jane Smith. We last left off that Jason had gone to the dentist and tracked down Jane Smith, the worst student that Mrs. Drizzle ever had, who left her a note that said, "You can look, but you'll never find me, and rub a monkey's tummy with your head." So, I think we can see where this is going, especially from the picture. Mrs. Drizzle chasing her. Her name is now Dr. Payne, though, because she's a dentist. "I found Jane Smith," Jason told Stephen the next morning when he got to school. "You better tell Dee Dee," said Stephen. They hurried across the playground. A whistle blew. "No running," ordered Mr. Lewis, professional playground supervisor. "Now I want you both to go back to the edge of the blacktop and walk this time." The boys went back the way they came and came back the way they went. Dee Dee was sitting on a bench. She had been benched by Mr. Lewis for excessive noise-making. "I found Jane Smith," Jason whispered as he walked past. Dee Dee and Jason entered the classroom together. Mrs. Drizzle was seated behind her desk. As they passed in front of her, Dee Dee stopped and said, "Did you have a nice time at the dentist yesterday, Jason?" "Yes, Dee Dee," said Jason. "It was very nice." "I wonder if we have the same dentist," said Dee Dee. "What's your dentist's name?" "Her name is Dr. Payne," said Jason, "but that hasn't always been her name." "It hasn't?" said Dee Dee. "Oh, no," said Jason. "Before she was married, her name was Jane Smith." "Jane Smith," said Dee Dee. "Is that spelled Janesmith? "Yes, that's how you spell Jane Smith," said Jason. "But like I said, that's not her name anymore. Her name is Dr. Payne, and she works at the dentist's office on 124 Garden Street." They took their seats. Late that afternoon, Dr. Payne finished work and walked out of her office. It had been a good day. She drilled 25 teeth. She made $60 for every tooth she drilled. 25 times 60 is $1,500. Not bad for a day's work. Of course, not all the teeth really had cavities, but how would any of her patients find out? She got into her fancy silver and black sports car and drove away. She sang along with the radio. She didn't even notice the old beat-up green station wagon in her rearview mirror. She lived in a mansion next to a lake. There was a stone wall around the house. She pressed a button on her car, and then the iron gate opened. The gate closed behind her as she headed up the long, winding driveway. A moment later, the old green station wagon stopped and parked next to the gate. A woman got out, walked around the back, and opened the tailgate. She pulled out a ladder. She set the ladder up against the wall. Under her arm, she carried an old blue notebook. Dun, dun, dun. Dr. Payne's butler handed her a drink, and the cook was making dinner. Dr. Payne's dog, cat, and husband were waiting for her in the den. The dog's name was Brussels, and the cat's name was Sprouts. She petted them both. Her husband's name was Sham. She petted him too. Champagne is his name. "Hi, darling, how was your day?" he asked. "I made $1,500, said Jane. They hugged and kissed. They loved each other, but they loved money even more. They had dinner by candlelight and watched the sunset over the lake. After dinner, they sat on their deck under the stars. Sprouts lay purring on Jane's lap, and Brussels faithfully at her side. Life was perfect. "I love you, darling," she said, petting Sprouts. "And I love you," said Sham. "I was talking to the cat," said Jane. The butler stepped out onto the deck. "Excuse me, madam," he said, "but there's an elderly woman out in the yard." Jane's long fingernails dug into her cat's neck. "I wonder how she got past the gate," said Sham. "I don't know," said the butler. "She's probably hungry. Perhaps I can give her some leftover." "No," shouted Jane. "Get rid of her." "Let me have a look," said Sham, as he followed the butler to the back of the house. He returned a moment later. "Darling, you'll never guess who's here. It's one of your favorite teachers. Isn't that the sweetest Jane screamed and jumped to her feet. Sprouts flew off her lap and into the hot tub. "What's wrong?" asked Sham. "You idiot!" shouted Jane. "I told you to get rid of her." She kicked the dog out of the way. Then she climbed over the railing and jumped off the deck to the ground 15 feet below. Excuse me. Mrs. Drizzle came out onto the deck. "You can't get away from me, young lady," she hollered. Jane hurt her ankle pretty badly when she hit the ground. It was either sprained or broken. She lay on the ground in agony and looked up at her former teacher. "You have homework to do," said Mrs. Drizzle, looking down at her. Jane's face twisted with pain. "Rub a monkey's tummy," she shouted. Then she struggled to her feet. She had a suitcase stashed in the boathouse, just in case this ever happened. She hobbled to it, grabbed it, and limped down to the lake, dragging her suitcase behind her. Mrs. Drizzle hurried down the steps on the side of the deck. Jane groaned as she threw her suitcase onto the motorboat. Then she pulled herself aboard and started the engine. "Darling, come back!" Sham shouted from the deck as he watched the boat sputter across the water. Mrs. Drizzle climbed into an old rowboat. "I'll find you, Jane Smith," she shouted into the darkness. "You can run, but you can't hide." Jane's voice echoed back across the black water. "Rub a monkey's tummy with your head." And neither of them was ever seen again. That's where we stop at chapter 23. Ears. So, Mrs. Drizzle's gone. So we've lost Mrs. Gorf, Mrs. Jules, Mr. Gorf. Now Mrs. Drizzle is gone. So, a new teacher's on her way. One with amazing ears. See you back in just a little while.